discussion that we had. That was a couple of weeks ago now, wasn't it, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, it's intermittent. It's not something we can promise frequently, but when we do it, we do it.
Yeah. So kind of a more of a long form or deeper dive into a discussion that might be like a 2-minute or a 3-minute conversation on a podcast because you're talking about all sorts of stuff. We'd like to kind of get into more of a deep dive on. So, Gary, what's the topic for the week?
Well, for this week, it's something that you and I spoke around, and it's considering Destiny, shooter versus RPG. So I wanted to speak for around half an hour together on it and just get your views. Can we really have the best of both worlds? So the idea for this topic came from the fact that Destiny has been marketed to us as a shared world shooter, right? That they've very rarely spoken about it as an RPG. It's always been a shooter with, I don't even think Destiny have necessarily said RPG elements. They've always just said a shooter with an investment system. And I guess the community seems to be leaning more and more heavily, especially recently with some of the ideas people were going to the summit with, on an RPG, and they want deeper elements. Now, I guess the discussion today is, have we really thought about what that means? You know, it's kind of a be careful what you wish for scenario. And what are the design limitations of a shooter? So if we have to consider the game a shooter first, do we think that that is going to impede what we expect them to deliver within the RPG side? So really the point of today's back and forth is your opinions, Briar, on what impact do you think changing the game over to more of an RPG would have on the shooter side of the game that we've come to grow and love?
So I don't have a ton of history with shooters that are also RPGs. Two of them come to mind that, you know, strike that balance. One is Fallout, which is very much an RPG first, then a shooter. And then there's Division, which is a shooter in the fact that you hold a button down and do DPS on an enemy, in my opinion, almost exclusively, right? Or at least was that way when I played it. So the balance to me of getting, you know, the RPG mechanics in a shooter is that you still have to have agency and feel like it's a good shooter. Like the shooting experience has to be good, which it is in Destiny for sure. But what players really want is, you know, like increases in, you know, how much damage they do, increases. They want those MMO kind of loot grinds and hooks, but they still want that shooter mechanic to be at the core, which I think is what Destiny really shines at, is that shooting mechanic.
Yeah, so you mentioned one of the games that I think we're going to reference today when we're discussing it, and that's The Division. But the second one, actually, which kind of leads off the discussion, is Borderlands, which is often a comparison that Destiny gets. You know, people say Borderlands has more depth, more range, more weapons, more outlandish stuff, but the shooting suffers partly as a result, but just partly because the engine's not as compelling as the Bungie engine, what they've got, you know, the Tiger engine. But actually Tyson Green, who was the investment lead when Destiny was first compiled way back in 2014, he was interviewed in December of 2013, speaking around the intentional design of the investment system in Destiny, and he called out Borderlands specifically and said, Destiny was never trying to be a Borderlands game. What they liked about Borderlands was that the people at the studio that were playing it liked getting loot and like trying that loot out and seeing what it did. But the huge spectrum and range of loot that you got made guns just not feel, there was no character to the weapon. There was nothing that made your loot stand out and made you feel like you wanted to keep coming back to try it all out. There was one or two standouts. So Destiny in its design was he said that he wanted there to be no bad builds or loadouts. He wanted it to be a shooter first where all the guns felt great, and that the loot pool would be much, much smaller in design, but it would let them create a tighter shooter out of those smaller elements. Do you think that's still their design goal, is to have this tighter loot pool that we keep criticizing them for?
It seems like it was, at least in the development of Destiny 2. Moving forward, I don't know if that's still going to be their goal, right? Their goal, I feel like their goals are very, very much shifting based on community feedback in Destiny 2. So it's hard to know what their goals are now.
Yeah, I mean, this is an older piece. I cited the time that it was, but I think that the important part of it is that you get a flavour for the fact that Destiny isn't trying to add, because before Destiny 2, I remember on the DCP, you guys, I think Tefty specifically said, I'm cool with fixed roles if you give me thousands of guns to look at.
Yeah.
And I think that if we looked back at what Bungie had said, we would have known that we were setting ourselves up for disappointment there. Like they are not on that wavelength. They're not trying to give us that.
Isn't your quote from before Destiny even came out, though?
It was, but that was like, again, the design element of why Destiny is a shooter and not an RPG. So he was asked, is it an RPG? And he said, well, no, an RPG would be far closer to something like Borderlands. And they didn't want that. They wanted a controlled roster of weapons that were still dropping like loot, but something that felt like each weapon had fingerprints on it and was authored and had a signature to it.
So when I think about Destiny 1, what I think about is a game that, you know, took a lot of chances, and Bungie didn't really know what they had, right? They didn't know, you know, they obviously had like design goals and they knew, you know, what they were trying to develop, but they didn't, it evolved into something else like over the course of Destiny 1, right?
Yeah.
Based on probably like how they saw people playing it and what people were asking for, and, you know, like it's such an ambitious thing, Destiny is, you know, to kind of have so many different types of gameplay and types of game in it that talking about their design goals before Destiny 1 came out and talking about their design goals like in the present tense, I feel like it's hard to reconcile those things, because those people, I would imagine, have different ideas than before Destiny came out.
For sure. It was just a more of a scene setter in the sense that we kind of know where they started from, so that was their starting point. I guess if we look at where we are today, first thing or area that I'd like to get your thoughts on is stats in themselves. So adding stats into the game. If we start adding stats into the game, do you think it adds bloat and complexity into something that's already quite a sleek system? You know, if you start having to think about the stats of a weapon in addition to its archetype, in addition to its fire rates and the element of it and everything else there, do you start to immediately depart from being shooter first?
It depends on what kind of stats you're talking about. Like, there already are stats attached to weapons, right? It's like there's the power level of a weapon and your power level and how much damage you're doing, and then there's like fire rates and ranges and reload speeds, you know, that all kind of combine to, you know, optimize DPS for a certain weapon, you know, in a certain situation. And then there's also the perks on weapons that, you know, like you kind of manage, you know, obviously you select weapons based on, you know, their base statistics, and then the combination of perks that are on top of that to kind of come up with your favorite weapons. Like the reason I love the Midnight Coup is because Rampage makes it very powerful, and Outlaw makes it, you know, so I'm constantly firing, right? It's like reloads are very, very quick with it. So, and all of that kind of is stats. Like, but you don't have to really interact with it if you don't want to. Like, you can just kind of, okay, this is, Midnight Coup is my gun. I don't really think about the stats on the weapon. I just run around killing shit with it, and that's fun to me. So I think it's probably hard for Bungie to do, but I think it's important for Bungie to kind of keep that balance where they put complexity in the game for people who want it, but for people who don't want it, they do kind of preserve some simplicity, right? You're still shooting bad guys, you know, or you're going into the Crucible and you're shooting other Guardians. So, and that's as complex as it has to be.
So that's the question: is how broad a range, or how big can the power delta be, then, in what people want? Because I've heard wildly variable accounts of what people want from like power scaling. Like people have said, yeah, I want my gun to blow up and shoot out like void energy and explode. You know, I think people have said they want it to have more Borderlands style crazy weapons in it.
Mm-hmm.
The issue therein lies, if you're talking now about people, this being optional to people and people not having to get these upgrades or get these sorts of weapons, how wide a power range do you need to have from an enemy difficulty perspective And then secondly, do you make once you've got it, you feel super overpowered and everything no longer be challenging, or do you make the people who don't have it feel crazy weak, and then you've detrimentally impacted their game?
I think you're probably safer making everything like very, very easy once you're like fully powered up. And I think that's probably something that Bungie has struggled with over the years, right? Is the Gallahorn was definitely a pain point for Bungie and for the player base, right? Is, if you wanted to raid, you either had it or you didn't, and that could very well determine if you were going to raid tonight or not. Like if you didn't have like a set group of friends that you're going to raid with and you wanted to use LFG, that was a big deal.
It was. I mean, that sort of brings us on to another point here, which is shared world challenges. And Destiny in itself has a unique problem with this that other things don't, in that it's not a single player game, and all activities are either shared by default or have the ability to bring other people into. So you think you've got stories, patrols, public events, lost sectors, strikes, nightfalls, raid lairs, raids, and crucible. When you say about, well, you make everything easy, and then once you've got the harder stuff, then you just face roll it. Well, what is the reason for you to keep coming back to the game then once you've got all the raid gear? And if we're assuming that we're adding more of a power delta in it, and we're saying that once you've got this gear, only the raid will be of challenge to you. The rest of the week then, how do you handle that difficulty? How do you make it worthwhile for you to go into a strike with your non-raid buddies, aside from helping them?
Well, so you've got different challenge deltas, right? You've got, a nightfall that anybody can pretty much do. Like we're doing it now basically in a match-made session. And then you've got the Prestige Nightfall, which is much more difficult and presents a harder challenge. And then if you crank up that challenge, which they let you do, you can even get better rewards theoretically. And I think that's a pretty smart way of doing it, right? I think the Nightfall actually, the current Nightfall system is a pretty smart way of doing it, because you can increase Guardian's power but then reduce it again for like the most challenging activities, right? They're going to do that for the raids too, with the prestige mode on the raids. Is they're going to basically artificially make content harder by restricting your loadout. So even if you have the most powerful weapon in the game, you might not be able to use it for the prestige mode on the raid layer, right? You might be restricted to hand cannons and submachine guns for a week. And that means that you can't bring the Gallahorn. I think there's ways to like kind of let players get like ultimate power, but then also, make the game hard on top of that too.
I guess there's a challenge that comes with that. So I think that's a fair answer. Is like, the Prestige Nightfall is a great example, and Heroic Strikes and whatever else, adding difficulty sliders on the content and challenge modifiers and whatever else there. The problem with that then comes is that you've got an exponential power curve. And what I mean by that is, do you think there's a danger that, okay, I do this Prestige Nightfall and I need super hard, super high level gear to do this. I need to be in the best gear available to do it. What's the incentive and reward for me to do that? Are you going to give me cosmetic items so that the best don't get an exclusive set of loot? Because we've shown that people don't like doing hard content for cosmetic only rewards. If you take that away and you say, well, on this hard content, we're going to give you exclusive, awesome stuff that then makes you, able to do even harder content. It's the case of the rich get richer. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but is that the type of game that Bungie... I mean, listening to what Bungie are talking about in terms of their design goals for the game, I think they still want a game that's heavily social, and a game that you want to play with your buddies, and a game that you are encouraged to form lasting relationships in. And part of that comes from the investment game. But do you think catering to a much more hardcore player base, or I shouldn't say that, a player base that want a very, very challenging shooter, do you think that is something that is in line with where Bungie want to take it?
I would say right now it is. I mean, based on what we're hearing about the newest DLC and what they're doing with that pulse rifle that you can only get if you get to, what is it, legendary status in the Crucible rank?
Fabled legend or something along those lines.
Maximum elo sweat status.
Oh yeah,
right?
I mean,
It's like
we'll breeze there. Don't worry about it though. We'll get there in a weekend.
you know, like that is showing that they're definitely catering some content to the most hardcore players, and they're rewarding the most hardcore players. I feel like, you know, raids have kind of always done that. I would say that it might be a weakness in vanilla Destiny or Destiny 2 and in the Curse of Osiris. It was definitely something that I think was stronger in vanilla Destiny than in Destiny 2. That new event that they showed in the reveal yesterday. What was that called?
Escalation Protocol, was that?
Escalation Protocol. Thank you. Is like, you know, they very much put an emphasis on how it's going to be difficult end game content, right? And I think that's good. Like, not everything has to be difficult end game content, right? There's still strike playlists. There's still the regular Nightfall. There's still adventures. There's still missions. There's still lost sectors, right? Not everything is going to be super difficult, high level content. But for the people who do enjoy that, I think it's good that they're providing that, right? Through the ranking system in competitive playlists, through you know, certain activities. I think it is good that, you know, that stuff is out there, and it's also good to have that stuff as a carrot on a stick for people who might not be able to access it now. But, like, you know, they're out there playing, you know, maybe they play once a week, and, you know, they're doing a patrol on the new Mars destination, and then they see a fire team come in and start this new escalation protocol off, and they see all these fucking awesome weapons and cool armor that they got from escalation protocol, and that, you know, that maybe they jump into a chat with them and say, hey, you know, where'd you guys get all this awesome stuff? And they kind of share, well, we got it from, you know, doing this or doing that. And, you know, you kind of convert somebody who, you know, maybe was a little more casual about the game into somebody who now wants to go out and find a clan and, you know, find friends to play with, right? I think that's the story of a lot of players of Destiny 1, especially the early days, right? Is they saw, you know, the Fatebringer, and they were like, where the fuck did you get that thing? And that kind of spurred on, you know, what became a deeper level of obsession with Destiny.
Side tangent on the escalation protocol. What makes that different to what we had with Archon's Forge?
I mean, the format of it is a little bit different, and the way power is rewarded. Nita, thank you for the 100 bits. The way power is rewarded is different in Destiny 2 than it was in Destiny 1. But essentially, it's a similar thing, right? It's kind of this like flirtation with a horde mode. Like, they never want to seem to commit to an actual horde mode in Destiny.
Yeah,
they kind of want to flirt with it with Prison of Elders and Archon's Forge, and what was the Oryx one? Court of Oryx.
Yeah.
But
it struck me as I mean, we're all kind of praising what it is, and I don't want to lessen that because I've not played it myself, but just, you know, the more I looked at it, the more I thought, well, if you look at Court of Oryx or Archon's Forge, they were events that were player initiated. I mean, obviously you had to have a token. Some of them could be incredibly challenging, you know, the tier 3s or the legendary ones in the Archon's Forge, assuming you didn't have a fire team with you to help out. And they rewarded really, you know, decent rewards. I think Saladin's Vigil and But Are Not Forgotten were both excellent special ammo weapons.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's completely dissimilar from Archon's Forge.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that it's a perfect piece of content either. I haven't played it yet, so I really don't know
that
if
was
I'm
a
even
side
gonna like
tangent.
it.
Just more of a thought while we were on Escalation Protocol was just around. I don't know. I'm hoping that it feels very, very different, but it struck a lot of similar nerves there. In terms of I guess other uniquely Destiny problems, how do you think that they can add interest and depth to weapons and armor while still retaining the shooter feeling and making it compelling without the gear, but then also still worthwhile with the gear?
I don't know if I understand the question.
So I guess break it down into two pieces. First one is, is it exciting? Maybe not for us, because I guess it probably would be, but for the general player base, to do Prestige Nightfall and to get a Better Devils attachment that gave you 25% less recoil.
No. No, I don't think that would be very exciting at all.
Because, like, if you're talking about, I don't know, grinding for legendary mods and things of that nature, it's like, is it rewarding to play that as a shooter, you know? Is it? And also, assuming that you start the content without this stuff, you're going to be, you know, grinding with ineffective weapons, or at least not optimal weapons, to try to get them optimal. I mean, is that really a gameplay loop that's fun in a shooter?
I think it is, yeah. I mean, the guns are still fun to shoot. I mean, Bungie nails the gunplay. So, like, even if you have a base level weapon, like if you have a blue weapon in Destiny, it's still fun to shoot. Like, playing the campaign for the first time, I would argue that, you know, the first 40 to 100 hours of Destiny 2 was really fun, right? It wasn't really until, like, we ran into, like, the end of the end game that we discovered, okay, there's limits to this. But yeah, I would say that, like, upgrading your gun and customizing it the way you want it to be is really fun.
But I mean, I guess part of the reason it was fun to play was that it's a shooter first. I mean, take your campaign experience of The Division, which is an RPG first, and how not just yourself, but the general complaints were that the game, you didn't feel powerful, everything took about 1,000 bullets to die, and that, you know, it didn't feel like a shooter. It felt like, I mean, obviously it was an RPG and is an RPG, but
yeah,
those complaints are largely redundant once you get to the appropriate power level for the content that you're playing in Division. And once your guns have all the attachments and everything else there, you have that, you know, feeling of power and feeling of dominance over the content. Do you think Destiny would be as positively praised with all the things that we do, saying the shooting feels great, if the Vex that you're shooting now, it took you 12 shots to kill?
No,
because your gun upgraded.
But like, I'm not asking for that either. Like, I do like difficulty in Destiny, right? Like, I like the high-end content to be difficult, and then I do want to get rewarded for doing that high-end content, right? Is I want to go into a prestige raid and have it be very difficult and feel a sense of accomplishment for just having done a difficult thing, but then also feel like I've been rewarded for doing it, right? By getting, you know, loot that is very good. Right now, the prestige mode raid is very difficult, but you don't feel rewarded for doing it. If you feel a sense of accomplishment after you've completed it, but that only keeps you going in once, right? Like, once you've completed it, unless there's, you know, a reason to go back in, you know, there's no reason to go back in, I guess. I mean, obviously.
So, what would customizing your weapons let you do in Destiny now that you can't already do?
It would allow, I don't know if it's something that it would let me do, it's something that it would let me feel. It'd let me feel an attachment to a weapon that I built and I designed specifically for how I like to play Destiny.
Okay. So
I think there'd just be like an attachment, and, you know, like trying to get, you know, my specific loadout, or like a number of loadouts depending on what I was trying to do, to be specifically just the way I like it. I find that very compelling. And I think you could do that without messing up like the gunplay, the core gunplay of Destiny.
Okay, so for you, it's like people in chat are saying, a sense of control and ownership of the weapon. So it's like, you know, you feel that you've got the only weapon in the game that is set up like that. You know, obviously
that'd be a false feeling, obviously. But...
No, yeah, but you know, you feel like this is Briar's hand cannon, this is Briar's midnight coup, that no one else has got, because Briar's designed it exactly how he wants it, and this is custom to you, and it's exactly how you like it.
Yeah, and I'd like to. I think it'd be really awesome if we could work toward that, right? If there was a way that I could make that gun a thing, you know, by doing specific tasks, right? Like if a certain adventure was likely to drop, you know, a barrel mod that I really wanted, that, or a grip mod that I really wanted, then I could grind that adventure. It would give me a bunch of benefits, right? It'd give me a reason to do the adventures, which I have no reason to do now. It'd give me, a sense toward like progressing my character and my weaponry. It also helped with the limited amount of inventory that Destiny 2 seems to be able to create for us. Like I feel like that kind of customization would go, benefit the game in a bunch of different ways.
Okay, so I guess the way that you think the game would benefit the most, and well, to you at least, because we can't speak for everyone else, is that this whole RPGification, or whatever you want to call it, of Destiny isn't about making content more difficult per se, or making you more powerful. It's just making you diverse. So giving you diversity in the weapons, loadout, and style that you have, as opposed to making you stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I would like, if I'm progressing, like I would like that progression to feel like it was making me more strong, though.
Okay, so you think it can't be completely horizontal? There has to be some vertical progression there.
Yeah,
but most of it, about, I don't know. Let's say you've got the midnight coup again, and we're going to take that as an example.
Mm-hmm.
What you really, really like about the coup is, I don't know, you want like a quick fire reload, like a second magazine strapped to the side of it, so you can very quickly, you get one quick reload and then you've got to put the magazine back in place, or something of that nature. And that would be something that made it stronger, but didn't necessarily invalidate the content that for people that didn't have it as such.
I think it's okay for some content to be out of reach for people who have not, gotten to a level where that content is accessible. Okay. I think it's okay to have high level content for players who can reach it. I don't think that every piece of content has to be available to, even the most casual of players.
Okay. And that's kind of a direction that Bungie were trying to move away from. So you think that they've now, based on Community Summit and the Warmind reveal, you think that Bungie are aligned to your hopes, or is this something that you just personally have?
I mean, that's definitely something that I believe. I do think based on what they've said about two activities, basically. One activity being competitive Crucible, and the fact that, if you can't attain a certain level, a certain rank in that, then you'll never be able to get that gun, or you won't, at least in season 3, sorry.
Yeah.
I think that shows that they are willing to make content that isn't necessarily accessible to every player, but rewards players who do put in a ton of time and, work really hard.
You mentioned the Crucible. That's our last topic on RPG versus shooter, and that is the unique problem of the Crucible. Now, there's a get out of jail free card here to say Crucible's exempt, none of this stuff works, but that goes against the core paradigm and design principle that we've seen in every single element of Destiny to this point, which is one guardian everywhere. The things that you do and the things that you grind for directly affect every part of your game, including PvP. And also, isn't part of the desire to grind and earn these rewards to then turn them on your fellow guardians and see what they perform?
Hell yeah.
So you've got that. So would there be massive imbalance or significant balancing issues as a result of this? And would we be okay with that? Because the community says, give me imbalance, give me broken. And then I feel like as soon as you get that, there's a very quick sentiment to turn and say, it's not fair. This guy's got like 2 times as quick reloads. This guy's got explosive bullets. This guy's got all this sort of stuff. I don't have it. I don't have the time to get it. I shouldn't be exposed to it. So where do you think Bungie should lie? Should they make it exempt in PvP? Should they just embrace the imbalance, or should there be a middle ground?
I don't really truck with the statement, give me imbalance in the Crucible. I don't think it's... Like, I understand where it comes from, in that, like, in the current game we have, everything kind of feels the same and boring. But I don't think just making, single OP weapons is the way forward. Like, the Colony, to me, is a specific example of that. Like, that gun takes 0 skill to use. It's guaranteed, 2 kills as long as you can, fire the trigger, right? Like, unless somebody kills you before you can actually shoot it, it's like guaranteed kills without even putting yourself in danger. Like, I don't think just giving people making OP things is the way forward. I think balance is commendable for the Crucible. I think the balance that we have is a little bit boring to most people in that it's just too slow. Like, I think if Bungie went ahead and, increased the time to kill of primaries and they made the weapons system a little more interesting, I think we'd be in a better spot with the Crucible. But I don't think that... I see balance as being a really hard to achieve but sought after thing, because it gives you choices. You constantly have choices in what you want to use. If you want to be a scout rifle player, or if you want to be a a pulse rifle turret player, you can do that. But there'd be balance in the fact that you would be completely overpowered by anybody who got in close range, because they'd have a hand cannon to just tear you apart, right? The balance to me is hugely important. I don't really truck with give me OP.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want singular OP weapons. I do want more powerful weapons in the Crucible, specifically the primaries, the energy and the kinetic weapons. I would like a faster time to kill, across the board in there. But I don't want to see just 1 or 2 outliers like we had with the Thorn and the Last Word in House of Wolves. I found that to be really repetitive and boring.
For sure, and that's a challenge really here. Is, do you think that the decision that Bungie seem to be sticking to their guns on to make Crucible an extension of your character's the ability to take your loadout into Crucible, do you think that's going to limit the amount of RPG they can bring into the changes that they make for the game? Because I guess the issue that you have around don't make broken things, well, the more power delta you add and the more ability you give people to customize and go really out there with their loadouts, the more scope you bring in for that to start really impacting PvP. And also, we've seen how challenging it can be for Destiny to playtest a static role, limited stable of weapons and get it effectively working. You start adding permutations of every sort to every weapon. Are we just going to completely abandon any hopes of a Crucible that's functional and working? Or am I being too pessimistic on that?
I don't think it's outside the reach. I think there's some simple solutions for Bungie. First of all, I would support them separating Crucible and PvE. I understand that they think it's one game and it's this connected thing, but we want these crazy ass weapons in PvE, but they would the Colony again is a good example. It's a super fun gun for PvE, and it doesn't harm the game in any way in PvE. It's just dumb fun. But in PvP, it's just super frustrating because you just got killed by somebody who never even saw you, right? They didn't have to take any risk. There's no risk reward to using the Colony. It's all reward. So, there's a couple of ways they could do that. They could just totally separate, some guns perform differently, in the Crucible than they do in PvE. They could use a Minions of Darkness modifier that they used to use in Destiny 1. I don't see it in Destiny 2. Yeah. Do you see it at all in Destiny 2?
No, I haven't seen it at all. But then there's no darkness in Destiny 2, so I guess it would be
Yeah, good point.
just
minions.
Non-guardians or whatever.
Yeah, I think a perfect way to fix the Colony would just be to put that modifier on it, right? Is it, little spider tracking things track Minions of the Darkness. And that way, you could still use it in PvP if you wanted to. It just wouldn't be the fucking cheesy-ass weapon that it is.
So, to that point, which I said at the start, if I'm a PvP player, then what's the incentive to keep me going for all these customizations and things? If you're going to start limiting what I can have, and I can't bring the crazy stuff that I've worked hard for into Crucible, is there still as much incentive to get them? Because for me, when I asked at the start the question of why would I bother? Why would I bother getting all this stuff? Why would I bother playing harder content to get stuff? For me, the answer is for Crucible. You know, I want to use it in Trials. I want to use it in, you know, Quick Play or wherever. I want to take all that gear in and have fun with it. Like, why did you grind for, you know, a really good AS Luna? You grinded for it to, and granted that's a bad example because that was in Crucible, but let's just say AS Luna dropped from strikes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Grasp of Malok's a fair example then, because people...
Yeah, perfect example.
People sat there in Omnigul for hours and hours and hours. Now, the Grasp is a passable PvE weapon at best. You know, it was acceptable. Where it really shone was in Crucible. And players would sit there doing monotonous, crazy activities to get a gun that was a power advantage in Crucible. Now, if you're saying, actually, we're going to stop you taking weapons that are strong into Crucible, and I know you've not necessarily said that, you said certain ones, but what's determined what's strong, what's determined what's not? There was a huge pushback.
It's got to be a case by case discretion thing, right? It's like, you know, if you want an, like the IS Luna, what did it have that made it so, or I'm sorry, the Grasp of Malok, what did it have that's made it so desirable? It had a fast time to kill. It had, you know, really good stability if you had a good one with counterbalance on it. Like, that's different than a colony that just tracks people around corners and, you know, one-shots them. To me, that's a huge difference, and it's not hard to discern the difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean...
Right? And you can even have the colony in PvP. You just restrict that one perk that makes those spiders track. You know, it would still be a gun, an effective gun. Maybe it wouldn't be effective. I don't know.
Yeah, it would just be a grenade launcher that skids along the ground. But
yeah,
it's I feel like you kind of have to go all in or nothing, and I feel like middle ground's going to not confuse people because they can read a perk, but I feel like who's the police that then decides what works, what doesn't? Because there was a lot of pushback, and partly by yourself and partly by the general player base, that in Destiny 1 that the sweat players removed the fun of Destiny PvP. By saying, you know, no exotic armor, no luck in the chamber, like no, plus, you know, all this sort of stuff. Like, no, you can't have that, it's too powerful. You can't have that, it's too powerful. It removes balance. I feel like once you start limiting the RPG stuff, you start taking away the essence of what makes Destiny PvP fun. The challenge then that Bungie have, not us as players have, is how do you make Crucible fun for people that haven't got that stuff, that step into the Crucible for the first time? Or is that not a problem? Is that something that people will get absolutely spanked and decide that actually I should go and grind for this stuff because I could do some spanking?
I mean, to me, that's one of the cool things about Destiny is that you get that fucking awesome weapon, you go and you bring it into PvP, and it gives you an advantage, right? That's why people grind for the Grasp of Malok. That's why they grind for the IS Luna. To me, it really is. It's like a case by case basis, man. And it's like, I agree. Like, I do think that they took a lot of the fun out of watching competitive Destiny with the rule changes that they made, you know, for the sweats, for the competitive Destiny 1 players, right? I think they made it like a sanitized version of Destiny too much. But I think that, like, at some point, if you want there to be a competitive scene, you have to do that to a certain extent, right? You have to.
I mean, they've got custom games there, so I guess they can make their own little rule set. But I'm just thinking about, you know, what Bungie gives us as a sandbox to work on. And if we were sticking to what we were saying about the RPG thing, I guess that it seems like where the conversation's landing on or concluding on there is that, at least it's where my feeling is that I'd actually rather have stronger RPG elements in Destiny Crucible than try to preserve the shooter first and trying to keep everything balanced is a strong word there, but actually let people bring attainable, personalized weapons that do have a power delta advantage into Crucible, and then let that be something that people are incentivized to get so that they themselves can have a power advantage, and that we're happy with that, even if it means that we're going to occasionally get dumped on because someone else has better gear. That's a situation that we're happy to accept so that in other instances we can have the better gear.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Okay, because that's something that people have fiercely opposed in terms of, you know, in the Crucible at least, people have said, you know, you can't have power scaling in the Crucible. You kind of have to make everyone an equal playing field, which define some of the changes that Iron Banner and Trials had, where people's power level no longer matters.
I don't know if that was because they wanted players to be on an equal playing field as much as they thought that it would improve netcode and make the game make the game lag less. I think that's exactly what they said. They specifically said that, I believe.
But it was exclusively a networking improvement thing. Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, it was because they had to, like, there was a bunch of calculations they had to do in Iron Banner and Destiny 1 that they don't have to do in Iron Banner and Destiny 2. Like, calculating... So
Guardian light levels, yeah.
Guardian light levels, and then, like, how much damage each weapon... Because you got to think, every Guardian can potentially have a different weapon, and the game has to calculate how much damage each of those weapons is doing with every shot that is fired on the battlefield. And then if you also add in the fact that, even if those, the same weapon also has to take into account, like, a modifier for light level, like, it's a lot of calculations to be doing on the fly.
It is. That's probably a fair point on that one there. But yeah, I mean, to conclude then, because we're over our budgeted time. They only give me half an hour here.
Oh.
This is a mass debate. We can't monopolise people's time, bro. The last time we spoke for 2.5 hours, and we degenerated into just praising Hamrick's biceps, which we're going to do again.
I would just certainly hope so.
To round off the discussion.
So jealous. Bolts is going to be next to those every day.
Really? But he better send photos, Snapchats of. Have a little WhatsApp group, Bicep Watch, that is just updated with photos of Hamrick. I'll be down.
Yeah, I would definitely subscribe to that group, man. I would even join Facebook to get into that group, and I don't like Facebook. But what's really more important to you? Pictures of Josh Hamrick's biceps or your privacy? My choice is clear.
Just sell every shred of my privacy for those sweet guns.
I just can't wait till the sun's out. It's going to be another level there.
Do you know what? The reveal stream that him and the Noose came out together, they didn't come out. That would have been a real moment for a Bungie stream. That they arrived on the sofa. I missed that in the summary. In the Noose happily married, just like closeted all along. I'm not implying they were a couple as well. We're kind of digging this rabbit hole deeper and deeper. I was hoping that Hamrick was going to embrace the meme, because he had kind of ascended to full meme status and was going to come out in a workout vest. Just midway, not even reference why he was wearing it, but just be in a vest during the stream. But no, professionalism won out, and the troll.
He has been embracing it on Twitter a little bit.
Yeah, I know. He's being held to impossible body standards, as he was saying. I was hoping that he'd come out in a workout vest, like Gold's Gym kind of thing across the front of it. But,
what are those pants? Like those real loose pants? They got like elastic bands around the ankles and the waist.
Yes.
They often come in like zebra prints.
Yeah, like dojo pants kind of thing. I know the ones you mean.
Yeah, they have like a name, but I don't know it.
Amazing. Yeah, I am shipping Bungie devs grace. That's telling my own strange homoerotic stories of what happened on the Bungie stream I watched. I guess we should probably conclude this discussion. So, RPG, shooter, Briar, can it be both? Should it be both? Should Bungie finally move away from their claim that this is a shared world shooter first and start really leaning into this being an RPG with just a quality shooter feel to it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way forward. Like, I mean, nobody else is doing it. The cost investment for anybody else to try and do it is so fucking high that there's very little hope. I mean, we know Blizzard tried to do it and couldn't pull it off. What Bungie's trying to do is no small feat, right? It's an incredibly ambitious game, and for them to make mistakes along the way and stumble along the way. Like, I know as a community we're very hard on them, but they are to be commended a lot of the time for what they do nail, and they nail the shooting mechanics. They nail a lot of what they do, and with things like the Bungie Summit, I think that they can continue to make this game something that's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think providing the Bungie staple or the famous 30 seconds of fun is preserved, and no matter what, the game is still fun for a complete layman to pick up and put a controller in their hand for the first time, and for the game just to retain that feel, and that's not lost. Then I completely agree that I think that the RPG elements can only benefit the game. I think we've spoken around the dangers of something like Borderlands and The Division, and I don't think Bungie is ever in any risk of going that far. The shared world challenges and the fact that, as you say, that gear doesn't necessarily need to be prohibitive, and I think it's better to feel stronger in content than for everyone to feel weak who's not looking at top content, and then round it off with the Crucible. And I think I agree with your points there that we don't need imbalance, but we certainly do need there to be real power delta in the Crucible again, and for there to be a desire and an incentive to grind the loot to feel that power, because I think that will help fuel people into your content if they're going to be able to feel like they have an advantage in something that's strong.
That's a good point, Gary. You know, like, and it also like it engages players, right? It's the thing that sets Destiny's multiplayer apart from like every other multiplayer is that there is like, you know, there is like all this different stuff to try out, and like sometimes you're gonna be like, oh my god, you know, the Midnight Coup is just tearing me apart. How do I get that gun?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, that's okay, right? That's what sets Bungie or Destiny apart from Call of Duty.
Yeah, there's a lot of other shooters out there. There's not many good RPGs, like persistent world RPGs, and especially, you know, nothing like Destiny. We keep going back to it, but there is nothing like it. And the more they abandon their RPG roots and the more they focus on shooters, the more homogenized they become in the market. You know, there is competitors in that space, good competitors.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to like games like Anthem, but I don't expect it to ever take over for like the thrill that Destiny gives me, because it's never gonna be the shooter that Destiny is.
No, for sure. I think Destiny's got a unique market position, and again, I think it's going to take a lot to topple it. I think Bungie have got a lot of room for mulligans. You know, they can do a lot of false starts. They can do a lot of Destiny 2s. And they've still got room to improve and grow. You know, I think it's not as bleak as everyone thinks, and it's just interesting sometimes to have these discussions to think about, you know, the little tweaks that would make a big difference. And yeah, I think definitely think that the RPG elements need to be brought out more, and we shouldn't be scared to embrace them. I think that's a wrap. Should we ship it?
Okay. All right.
I want to retain the quality. We're on a peak there with Hamrick's biceps. And
I feel like you're right. It was just like, you know, Bungie is gonna mess up. It's okay. I mean, but the way they mess up, I think, is important, right? Like if they're pulling, you know, hijinks like they were in November with like, you know, hiding how much experience we get, and, you know, like just like completely focusing on loot in the Eververse, and like really just making players feel like they're getting ripped off or they're getting screwed. I think that's a bigger problem for Bungie than any kind of gameplay problem, right? Like, that's how they almost lost me. When I was having thoughts about not playing Destiny anymore, it wasn't because the weapon system wasn't satisfying or the gameplay loop wasn't satisfying. I was always having fun in the Crucible. I was always having fun, you know, doing stuff in Destiny. It was, well, I feel like these guys are just assholes. And I just don't want to, you know, be a part of this. That's when they almost lost me.
I think we know the real reason. It's when Hamrick politely asked you to stop sending in those pictures.
Look, I'm not going to stop, Hamrick. It's just not happening. I don't care how many restraining orders you get.
I don't care how many times you change your number. I'm going to find it, and I will keep sending. You will be mine, Joshua.
I think that's a good way to end it right there, Gary. That was good. You will be mine, Joshua.